I demanded that my entitled younger daughter give up her savings to her more deserving sister and move back to stabilize her sister's lifestyle. Then I called her selfish and outcast her instead of apologizing. Now, my delusional younger daughter has abandoned me. I am writing this because my younger daughter left a family gathering a few days ago and has now stopped answering my calls, and my husband says she is being dramatic while my older daughter says I should have spoken even more plainly to her. I do not think I said anything so outrageous that it explains this reaction, but maybe people who are not involved will see something I do not. I am a mother. I am 47. My husband Victor is 53. We have 2 daughters, Irina, who is 30, and Mila, who is 24. Irina has a little boy, Luca, who is 6. Before anyone jumps to a conclusion, yes, I know what people usually say when one child has a child and the other does not. I know people love to accuse parents of favoring the one with the grandchild. I am not stupid. I know how it looks from the outside. But life is not a clean little equation where you give every person the exact same thing and then clap for yourself because you have been fair. People need different things at different times. I have always believed that. We are not rich, we have never been rich. Even calling us comfortable would be generous. For years, it has been one bad month followed by another month where you think maybe this one will be calmer, and then the washing machine breaks or rent goes up or someone needs medicine or school supplies or winter boots. I clean in a hospital. My husband takes whatever work he can get. Some of it official, some of it cash, some of it lasting long enough that he starts planning ahead, and then the job disappears, and we are back to measuring out what can wait another week. So when people speak very casually about what parents should pay for, I always wonder with whose money. Both girls grew up hearing us say we wanted them to study, have a better life, get out, do something clean and stable, sit at a desk if they wanted, wear nice shoes to work, whatever. We said all of that because we meant it. We did want it. Wanting it and being able to finance it are 2 different things. There were years when we really believed we would manage it somehow. Then, one thing after another happened. Victor injured his back. I had a stretch where my hours were reduced. Irina got pregnant at 23 and moved back in for a while. Her boyfriend, if anyone is curious, evaporated into thin air the second there was real responsibility involved. He makes occasional appearances when it suits him and then goes missing again. So yes, Irina came back with the baby, and no decent income and nowhere good to go. Mila was 18 around then, already finishing school, already with that look on her face she gets when she decides she will expect nothing from anyone and then make you feel it without saying much. Even as a child, she was like that. Irina would cry, argue, and say whatever was in her head. Mila would go silent, and somehow the silence made the whole room feel smaller. When Irina came back with Luca, the apartment changed overnight. Everything revolved around feeding him, getting him to sleep, washing tiny clothes by hand because the machine was acting up again, watching him when Irina had shifts or interviews, or simply reached the point where she looked half dead and needed to sleep for 3 hours without listening for him to cry. Mila helped in the way people praise from a distance because it sounds mature. She would warm a bottle, hold him while she read something for class, run to the pharmacy, and watch him while I showered. But there was always this stiffness in her, not towards the boy. She loves Luca. Towards the whole fact of it. Towards the way one person's mess lands in the middle of everyone else's life and suddenly becomes everybody's shared duty. I remember one evening very clearly because it says a lot about how the girls are. Irina was in the kitchen crying because the father had promised to send money and then vanished again. Luca was maybe 10 months old. Mila came in from work still wearing that ugly supermarket uniform, put her bag down, opened the fridge, stared for a second, and then asked what was for dinner. I said cabbage soup. She said fine. Irina started in with, must be nice to come home and think only about dinner. Mila didn't reply. She just took the pot off the stove and started heating it. Irina kept going, saying some people could at least ask if she had eaten. Some people could at least act like they cared. Mila put the spoon down and said, I care about Luca. I'm tired of every problem in this house being dragged to the center of the table the second I come in. That was Mila all over. Useful, reliable, and cold when she felt cornered. People adore self-sufficient children until those children start acting like they truly do not need you. She started working young. First small jobs, then longer hours, then a second job. I used to tell her not to wear herself out, and she would say, someone has to pay for my life. I know how that sounds, like we abandoned her. We did not. We fed her, housed her, and clothed her, did what parents do. But yes, she wanted more than we could provide. More courses, better housing later, savings, a plan. Mila has always looked at life like a wall you either climb with your own hands or stay at the bottom of forever. There is something admirable in that, but there is also something hard in it. There were times I tried to reassure her. I told both girls more than once that we would help when the time came for serious studies. I believed it when I said it. People are going to say I should never have promised anything I could not guarantee. Fine, maybe. But parents say hopeful things. You tell your children, we'll figure it out. You tell them, when the moment comes, we'll help. Then the moment comes, and life has already eaten through whatever you thought you could save. Mila never forgave us for those words, though she rarely said it openly. She let it come out sideways. She stopped telling us things, stopped asking, stopped including us in her plans. By the time she was 20, she already carried herself like a tenant passing through. Then she eventually moved out, first with roommates, then into a tiny place closer to work. She kept changing jobs, always chasing better pay and better hours. For the last 6 years, she has worked more than anyone I know her age. Some of it honest hard work, some of it miserable work. No young woman should have to take just to gather enough money to move one step ahead. I am not denying she worked for what she has. She did. What bothered me, if I'm honest, was the attitude she developed around it. As if every sacrifice she made was pure and every sacrifice anyone else made was somehow contaminated. She would come home for dinner and make these little comments without even looking at us. I picked up another shift. I finally found a place that pays on time. I am glad I learned early not to wait for anybody. Things like that. Always so neat and calm. Never a direct accusation, and still every word landed exactly where she wanted it to. Irina is the opposite. If she needs help, she asks. If she is angry, you hear about it. If she is drowning, the whole room knows it. That does not make her pleasant all the time, but at least you do not have to guess where you stand. She works too, by the way. Not enough for Mila's taste, probably, but she works. She has had bad luck with employers, bad luck with men, bad luck with childcare, bad luck with all of it. People who have never had to arrange a life around a child and unstable income say she should have made better choices. Fine, maybe she should have. The boy still needs food either way. There were many little incidents over the years that widened the gap between the girls. Nothing dramatic enough that you could point to one day and say, that was the cause. More than the usual family rot that builds in corners. One time, Mila bought herself a used laptop after months of saving. She kept it in her room when she still lived at home. Irina borrowed it for 1 hour to fill out some application while Luca was coloring at the table. He spilt juice on the keyboard. The laptop worked after drying out, but a few keys never felt right again. Irina said it was an accident, and she already had enough on her plate without Mila acting like a damaged machine was a tragedy. Mila said nothing at the time, which, with her, is never a good sign. Later that night, she moved all of her papers, electronics, even her shampoo and face cream into her room and started locking the door whenever she left. Victor said that was ridiculous in a family home. Mila said family homes apparently had poor security. Another time I asked Mila if she could watch Luca on a Saturday because Irina had a shift and I had one too. Mila had already agreed to work extra hours. She said no, just no, no apology, no attempt to soften it. I said we were in a difficult position, and she replied that every difficult position in this family seemed to have her name attached to the solution. Victor was furious. He said she could help for one afternoon and still survive. She looked right at him and said, "That's easy to say when it's never your afternoon being offered." She did stay in the end because her manager changed the schedule, but she made it feel like the whole household owed her a debt. That is what people do not get. Mila rarely refuses outright. She helps, but she counts. She remembers. She stores every slight and every inconvenience in perfect condition, then carries it around like proof of character. Irina, for all her faults, forgets quickly, says terrible things one day and asks if you want tea the next. Mila does not forget anything. Then there was the matter of the money we borrowed from her once. I know people will seize on that. It was 3 years ago. Victor's work had fallen through, and the landlord was suddenly on top of us over 2 months of delayed utilities. We were short, very short. Mila had some savings by then. Not a fortune, but more than we had. I asked if she could lend us enough to cover the gap for 2 weeks. She stared at me for so long before answering that I wanted to take the words back. Then she transferred it. She never mentioned it again. Which sounds generous until you understand how she operates. She did not need to mention it. From then on, every time the subject of money came up, that old transfer sat there between us whether anyone said the number aloud or not. We did pay her back, though later than planned. I want that clearly stated. We did not steal from her. But after that, she became even more private. She stopped leaving bank papers anywhere, stopped discussing pay, stopped mentioning what she had saved, as if the very act of us knowing anything about her finances put her in danger. Last autumn, after years of trying, she got some kind of scholarship or grant. She did not explain it well because she never explains anything well when it involves us. It was for further education, some program that would finally get her out of these dead-end jobs and into proper work. She said she would handle living costs herself with her savings. I congratulated her. I was proud, genuinely. I even cried after she left because for all our tension, she is my daughter, and I know how hard she fought for that opportunity. But I would be lying if I said there was no bitterness mixed into it. She had spent years acting as though she were raising herself from the ground with her bare hands while the rest of us just sat around waiting to drain her dry. That is not how I remember things. I remember cooking for her while she came home exhausted. I remember washing uniforms. I remember staying up when she was late because I could never sleep until I heard the key. I remember giving her bus money when I had wanted to stretch that same note into 2 meals. Those things never count in her version. Only direct cash seems to count. Around the same time, Irina was having another rough stretch. Luca needed a dental procedure. The clinic kept adding little extra charges. Her rent had gone up. One of the after-school women she relied on stopped taking children in the afternoons. Every month there was some new crisis. She complained a lot, yes. Even I got tired of hearing it. But if I asked myself honestly which situation kept me up more at night, it was always Irina and the boy. Mila, for all her resentment, lands on her feet. Irina panics and takes everyone down with her. A few months back, I made the mistake of saying at dinner that at least Mila would soon be properly settled if all went well with her studies. Irina laughed in that dry way she has when she wants a fight and said, "Of course she will. Mila always manages to keep what's hers." Mila was visiting that night. She looked at her sister and asked, "Would you like a medal for saying the quiet part out loud?" Then both of them started. Old complaints, new complaints, little jabs dressed up as jokes. Victor told them both to stop, but he was already irritated, and he always takes a harder line with Mila because he knows she can take it. Or maybe he thinks she can. He told her she had become proud. She said pride was cheaper than dependence. After that dinner, she stayed away for a while. Then, because families never fully break until they do, she started coming around again, short visits, bringing pastries sometimes, asking Luca about school, keeping conversation shallow enough that no one had room to grab hold of it. The gathering a few days ago was at my sister's apartment. Nothing formal, just a family lunch because her son had come back from abroad for a week and everyone wanted to see him. It was crowded, noisy, too hot, the usual. Kids running around, plates balanced on knees, people talking over each other. Mila came late because of work and looked tired. Irina was already there with Luca and was in one of those moods where she speaks as if every sentence is a complaint dressed in makeup. At first things were fine. Mila kissed me on the cheek, said hello to everyone, gave Luca a chocolate bar she had hidden in her bag, sat at the far end of the table, and kept mostly to herself. My sister asked how her studies were going. Mila said classes had not started yet, but housing was sorted and paperwork was almost done. One of the cousins said that was impressive. Another asked if the scholarship covered everything. Mila said no, only tuition, and she would use what she had saved for rent and bills until she could work out something more stable. I should have noticed Irina listening. Her whole face changes in a particular way when money enters the room. She keeps smiling, but her eyes sharpen. Someone, I think it was my brother-in-law, made some passing remark about how expensive it is for a young person to live alone now. I said, without thinking much, well, she planned for it. She's had money put aside for years. I did not announce a number. I did not open her bank account and wave it in the air. I made one comment, the kind a mother makes when she is proud that her child prepared ahead. Mila looked at me immediately. Not surprised, more like annoyed that I had spoken at all. Irina turned her head towards her and said, "For years." In this strange light voice she uses when she is about to pick at something. Mila put her glass down and said, "Enough, anyway." Irina let out a laugh and said, "That must be nice." I could already feel where it was going, and before I could redirect the conversation, my sister asked Mila whether she had always planned to leave for school or whether this scholarship came as a surprise, and Mila answered that she had been saving towards it for 6 years because she knew nobody else was going to fund her life. Now, I know how that sounds. I heard it too, at a table full of family. After everything, she said it calmly, like she was discussing the weather, and the whole thing changed right there. Victor's face went dark. Irina sat back in her chair and looked at Mila for a second before saying, very clearly, "So you've got enough sitting there for housing and all that, and you still plan to live alone while Luca and I are barely getting through the month." And that was the point where the conversation stopped being casual and started turning into something else. I could feel people around the table starting to pay attention in that quiet way families do when something uncomfortable begins, but no one wants to be the first to interfere. Forks slowed down, conversations nearby faded, and even the children seemed to drift towards the other room without being told. Mila didn't answer right away. She looked at Irina like she was deciding whether this was worth engaging with at all. That look alone irritates people. It makes it seem like everyone else is operating on a lower level. Irina leant forward a bit and said, "I'm asking a simple question." Mila finally said, "Yes, I plan to live alone. I've already signed for it." Irina let out a short breath through her nose, like she'd just been proven right about something. "Of course you did. Why wouldn't you?" At that point, I stepped in because I could see it sliding somewhere unnecessary. I said, "Irina, don't start. We're here to eat, not argue." She turned to me and said, "I'm not arguing. I'm trying to understand how this makes sense." Mila said, "It makes sense because it's my life." And there it was. That tone again, flat, final, like a door quietly closing. Irina laughed again, but there was no humor in it this time. "Your life." "Right. And the rest of us are just what? Background noise." Mila didn't even look at her when she replied, "You're making it dramatic." "Dramatic," Irina said, louder now. "You've been sitting on money for years while I'd been asking for help with basic things. You couldn't mention it once." Mila turned her head slowly then. "Why would I?" There were a few small sounds around the table, people shifting, someone clearing their throat. My sister gave me a look like I should step in again, but I wanted to hear where this was going because, to be honest, Irina wasn't wrong to feel blindsided. We are family. You don't hide things like that completely unless you're making a point, Irina said, "because we're family. Because maybe we could have used help. Because maybe Luca could have used it." Mila's expression didn't change. "Luca is your responsibility." That landed hard. Even people who usually stayed out of things reacted to that one. Irina pushed her chair back slightly. Not enough to stand, just enough to show she was done pretending this was a normal conversation, and said, "Say that again?" Mila didn't raise her voice. "He's your child, not mine." Irina shook her head slowly, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You really are something." I said her name sharply then because this was getting out of hand, but she ignored me. She turned to Mila again. "Do you have any idea how many times I've had to ask for help? How many times have I had to choose between rent and food? And all this time you're just sitting there quietly building a nice little escape plan." Mila said, "I wasn't sitting, I was working." And we weren't. Irina shot back immediately. "You think I've been relaxing this whole time?" Mila gave a small shrug. "I think you've been making choices." That was the first moment I felt something shift from irritation into something sharper. There's a difference between defending yourself and poking at someone who's already struggling. I said, "Mila, enough. You're not better than anyone here." She looked at me then, and there was that same expression again, the one that makes it feel like she's already decided how this conversation ends. She said, "I didn't say I was." Irina muttered, "You didn't have to." Victor finally spoke. He said, "This is exactly what I meant before. This attitude. Like you've done everything alone and nobody else exists." Mila turned toward him and said, "I didn't say that either," he said. "You imply it every time you open your mouth. You talk like we've all been holding you back instead of supporting you." She let out a quiet breath and shouted, "Supporting me how?" That question sat there, heavier than anything else she had said so far. Victor said, "We raised you." Mila said, "And I'm grateful for that. That's the baseline. That's what parents do." I could feel the temperature at the table drop. Even my sister looked uncomfortable now. Irina leaned forward again. "So that's it. That's all it counts for. You lived here, ate here, had a roof over your head, and now you act like none of that matters because we didn't hand you money on top of it." Mila didn't answer immediately. She picked up her glass, took a sip, then set it down carefully like she had all the time in the world. She said, I didn't say it doesn't matter. I said it's not something I owe my future for. Irina let out a bitter laugh. Your future. Always your future. At this point, I felt like I had to bring things back to something reasonable, something grounded. I said, nobody is asking you to give up your future. Irina turned to me so quickly I almost flinched. Why not? There it was, straight out. The table went completely quiet. I said, Irina, no, why not? She pressed. She has enough saved to live comfortably while she studies. She said it herself. She could stay with you and Dad instead, save that money, and help me and Luca. Why is that such a crazy idea? Mila actually blinked at that, like she hadn't expected it to be said so plainly. Then she said, because I don't want to move back in. Irina threw her hands up slightly. Of course you don't. Why would you inconvenience yourself when you could just watch the rest of us struggle from a safe distance? Mila said, I'm not responsible for your situation. Irina leant forward again, her voice lower now but more intense. You're part of this family. And? Mila said. And family helps each other, Irina snapped. That's when Victor spoke again, firmly this time. She's right. Mila looked between them, and for the first time there was something like disbelief on her face. You're serious. I said, it's not about being serious or not. It's about understanding that sometimes you have more than someone else, and you step in. She looked at me then, really looked, and I could tell she was measuring every word before she said it. She said, I've been stepping in since I was a teenager, just not in ways you seem to count. Irina shook her head. Oh, here we go again. Mila ignored her. I worked while studying. I paid for my own things. I stopped asking for anything because I knew the answer would always be later or we'll see. I built this so I wouldn't have to depend on anyone. Victor said, and now you've built it and you can help. Mila let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. You don't see the problem with that, he said flatly. No, I don't. Irina joined. Neither do I. I said, Mila, listen, nobody is asking you to hand over everything. But you have enough. You could adjust your plans a little. Stay with us for a while, help your sister get back on her feet. Luca is growing up without stability. Mila's jaw tightened slightly. He has stability. Irina almost stood up at that. You have no idea what you're talking about. I know he has a home, food, and people who care about him, Mila replied. Irina's voice rose again. Barely. And whose fault is that? Mila said before she could stop herself. That hit exactly where it shouldn't have. Irina stood up then, fully this time, pushing her chair back hard enough that it scraped loudly across the floor. Say that again. Mila stayed seated, but there was tension in her shoulders. I said, enough, both of you. Everyone was staring at us now. There was no pretending this was just a small disagreement anymore. I turned to Mila, trying to keep my voice steady. No one is attacking you, but you're sitting there acting like you're completely separate from all of this. You're not. This is your family. She looked at me, and there was something colder in her expression. Family doesn't mean access to everything I have? Irina let out a harsh laugh. Everything you have. Listen to yourself. Mila said nothing. Victor leant forward and said, no one is asking for everything. But what you're doing right now, holding on to money while your own sister struggles, it's selfish. That word hung there. Mila's eyes flicked to him. Selfish, he said. Yes, selfish. Irina nodded immediately. Exactly. I hesitated for a second, but then I said, it does come across that way. Mila looked at all three of us then, one by one, like she was confirming something. Then she said very quietly, so that's what this is. Irina said, what else would it be? Mila pushed her chair back slowly and stood up. You want me to give you the money? Irina didn't hesitate. Yes. There was a moment after Irina said it where everything felt strangely settled. Not calm, just decided. Like all the circling finally landed on something solid. Mila didn't react immediately. She just stood there, one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair, looking at Irina in a way I hadn't seen before. Not angry, not hurt, just very, very distant. You want me to give you the money, she repeated, quieter this time. Irina didn't back down. Yes, you have more than enough to get by. We don't. Mila glanced at me, then at Victor, like she was waiting for one of us to soften it, to say something that would make it sound less blunt. I didn't. Because honestly, I didn't think it was unreasonable. I said, not everything. But yes, you could help. You could make a real difference right now. She nodded slowly, like she was taking that in piece by piece. She asked, and if I say no? Irina let out a short laugh. You already did. Mila looked at her again. I'm asking what happens next. Victor answered, that one. Then you walk away from your family when they need you. That was when something shifted for good. Not in the room, we were already past saving that, but in her. She picked up her bag from the chair, slung it over her shoulder, and said, I think I already have. I stood up then and said, Mila, don't be dramatic. She looked at me, and there was something almost tired in her face now. You asked me to give up the one thing I built for myself. No one said give it up, I said quickly. We said help. With what? She asked. Money that I'll never see again. Moving back into a house I worked years to leave. Putting everything on hold so we can pretend this is temporary. Irina scoffed. God, you make it sound like we're asking for your life. Mila didn't even look at her and said, you are. That irritated me more than anything else she had said. I said, that's ridiculous. You're exaggerating to make yourself look like the victim. She gave a small shake of her head. No, I'm just finally saying it out loud. Victor's patience snapped then. Enough with this tone. You're talking like we've done nothing for you, she replied. I didn't say that, he shot back. You imply it, every time, like you raised yourself, fed yourself, and housed yourself. Mila said, I made sure I wouldn't have to depend on promises. That stung more than I expected. I said, we did what we could, she said, and I did what I had to. Irina crossed her arms. So that's it, that's your final answer. Mila looked at her for a long second and said, yes. Irina let out a sharp breath like she'd been slapped. Unbelievable. I said, Mila, think about this properly. Don't make a decision like this in the middle of an argument. I already made it, she said. Then reconsider it, Victor added. She shook her head. No. And that was it. No hesitation, no wavering, just no. Irina muttered something under her breath. Something about selfish people always landing on their feet, and Mila finally reacted to that. She turned slightly towards her and said, you don't get to resent me for doing what you didn't. Irina's face went red instantly. She said, excuse me. I stepped in again and told Mila to stop. But she didn't. She said, you made your choices. I made mine. Irina took a step towards her. You think I chose this? Mila replied. I think you expect everyone else to fix it. That was the breaking point. Irina started talking over her, fast and angry, bringing up everything. Money, childcare, stress, sleepless nights, how easy Mila had it without a child, and how convenient it must be to think only about herself. It all came out at once, messy and loud. Mila didn't try to match her. She just stood there for a second, then turned back to me. She said, I won't give you the money. And maybe this is where people will say I went too far. I said, then don't expect us to pretend that's okay. She held my gaze for a second. Then she nodded once, like she had expected exactly that. Okay, she said, and she left. No scene, no shouting on the way out. Just walked past everyone, out the door, and that was it. That was 3 days ago. She hasn't answered a single call. At first, I wasn't worried. Mila has always been like this. When she decides she's done with a conversation, she disappears for a bit, cools off, and comes back later like nothing happened. I thought this would be the same. It isn't. I've called, messaged, even asked one of her friends if she'd heard from her. Nothing dramatic, just checking if Mila is okay. The friend said she's fine, just busy. Busy. Too busy to respond to her own mother. Victor says to leave her alone. He thinks if we chase her, it will only confirm whatever idea she's built in her head about us pressuring her. He keeps saying she'll come around once she realizes she overreacted. Irina doesn't think that at all. Irina is furious, not just at Mila, at the whole situation. She keeps thinking about the conversation, picking apart every sentence, saying Mila has always thought she was better than everyone else, and that this just proved it. She said more than once that if Mila can walk away that easily, then maybe she was never really part of the family to begin with. I don't agree with that entirely, but I also don't agree with Mila. That's the part I keep coming back to. Because people will say we pushed her, that we cornered her in front of everyone, that we made it impossible for her to respond without feeling attacked. Maybe. But what was the alternative? Smile and nod while she sits there talking about years of saving, about independence, and about not relying on anyone while her own sister is struggling right in front of her. Pretend that doesn't create a divide. Pretend that doesn't say something about priorities. I keep thinking about that moment when she said she made sure she wouldn't have to depend on promises, as if everything we did was just empty words, as if raising her counted for nothing, as if family only matters when it doesn't cost her anything. And yes, I'm frustrated. not just because she refused. Because of how easily she refused. No hesitation, no real thought. Just a clean, immediate no, like we were asking something unreasonable. Maybe people reading this will agree with her. Maybe they'll say she worked for that money, that it's hers, that she doesn't owe anyone anything. I understand that logic, I just don't agree with it. Because if that's true, if you owe nothing to the people who raised you, who supported you in whatever ways they could, and who still open their door to you, then what exactly is family supposed to be? A place you visit when it's convenient. A group of people you keep at arm's length so they don't interfere with your plans. I don't think it works like that, and maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I don't think it should. Still, it's been 3 days. Her room is still the same as she left it the last time she visited. There's a sweater she forgot draped over the back of a chair. I noticed it yesterday when I went in to get something and stood there longer than I needed to. I almost called her again. Didn't. Not because I don't want to fix this, but because I don't think I'm the one who should. She made her position clear. We made ours, and now we're here. Waiting. And I don't know if she's going to come back this time. Let's see the analysis. Most people reading this are going to land on a quick conclusion and feel satisfied with it. They'll decide who's right and who's wrong, maybe throw in a few lines about toxic families or entitlement and move on. But if you slow down a bit, this situation is less about money and more about two completely incompatible definitions of what family means and what it's allowed to take from you. The uncomfortable part is that both sides are internally consistent, not morally equal, but logically consistent within their own framework. And that's why this kind of conflict doesn't resolve, it just fractures. Let's start with the mother, because her perspective is more layered than it looks at first glance. She doesn't actually see herself as taking something from Mila. In her mind, she's redistributing within a shared system. That's a very specific worldview, one where individual effort still ultimately belongs to the group that made that effort possible. It's not about fairness in the sense of equal outcomes. It's about circulation. Resources flow to where the need is greatest, not where they originated. What's interesting is that she doesn't frame Mila's independence as admirable in a standalone way. She acknowledges the hard work, yes, but only up to a point. After that, it becomes almost suspicious. Like independence, when taken too far, starts to look like rejection. To her, Mila didn't just become self-sufficient, she opted out of the family economy. And in doing so, she unintentionally challenged the entire system the mother relies on to justify years of imbalance. Because here's the truth buried under everything. This family has never been equal, and it was never going to be. Irina required more, not occasionally, consistently. Emotionally, financially, logistically. And over time, that creates a gravitational pull. Families like this don't consciously choose a favorite. They orbit around the person who needs the most at any given moment. The problem is that orbit doesn't reset. It hardens. And once it hardens, anyone who resists it starts to look like the problem. Mila understood that early, even as she never spelt it out. That's why her behavior feels so calculated, not in a manipulative way, but in a defensive one. She didn't just work hard, she built distance on purpose. Financial independence wasn't just about survival, it was about insulation. What the mother interprets as coldness is actually Mila removing herself from a system where contribution is expected to be endless and undefined. Now here's where it gets more interesting. The family doesn't actually resent Mila for having money. They resent her for having control over her own limits. That's the real conflict. Because in this family, limits are negotiable, especially if someone else's need is urgent enough. Irina's situation is always urgent, always immediate, always framed as something that can't wait. Mila's future, on the other hand, is abstract, long-term, flexible in their eyes. So when the two collide, the logic becomes, why protect something distant when something immediate is suffering right in front of you? That's not an irrational thought. It's actually very human. But it's also how long-term stability gets sacrificed over and over again in families like this. Mila refusing isn't just a financial decision. It's her rejecting that entire pattern. She's saying, my future is not less real just because it hasn't happened yet. And the family hears, you don't matter enough. That gap is almost impossible to bridge. Now let's talk about the moment that really defines everything, the mother saying, then don't expect us to pretend that's okay. That line doesn't get enough attention, but it should. Because that's the moment where support becomes conditional. Up until then, the conversation is framed as expectation, pressure, and even guilt, but still within the bounds of family tension. That sentence crosses into something else. It introduces a consequence. If you don't give, you lose approval. And Mila recognizes it immediately. That's why her response isn't explosive. It's quiet, final. She's not reacting to the request for money anymore. She's reacting to the realization that her place in the family is tied to what she's willing to sacrifice. And once that's clear, the decision becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. What makes this situation particularly difficult is that the mother genuinely doesn't see it that way. She doesn't think she's withdrawing love or support. In her mind, she's reacting to a betrayal of shared values. And that's what makes her perspective so frustrating to outsiders. She's not pretending. She really believes that Mila's refusal is a moral failure, not a boundary. That's why she keeps returning to the idea of family, not as an emotional bond, but as an obligation system. A structure where resources, time, and effort are pooled and redistributed based on need. The issue is, Mila never agreed to that system as an adult. She participated in it as a child because she had no choice. But everything she's done since then, working, saving, distancing, has been a gradual withdrawal from it. The family just didn't notice, or didn't take it seriously. Until now? And now they're treating her refusal as a sudden change, when it's actually the final step in a process that's been happening for years. That's another thing worth pointing out. Mila didn't explode. She didn't lash out. She didn't even argue that much. She just declined, calmly. And that calmness is what unsettles everyone the most. Because it removes the possibility that she's acting out of emotion. It suggests that she's thought this through long before this conversation ever happened. Which means this wasn't a reaction, it was a position. And positions are harder to break than emotions. Now, about the aftermath. The mother is waiting. That's important. She's not reaching out aggressively, not apologizing, and not trying to repair anything. She's waiting for Mila to come back and re-enter the system on its terms. Because from her perspective, that's what resolution looks like. Mila, on the other hand, is doing something the family isn't used to. She's holding silence. Not as punishment. As confirmation. She's showing that she meant what she said, not through words, but through absence. And here's the uncomfortable reality for anyone reading this. This situation doesn't have a satisfying resolution, because it's not built on a misunderstanding. It's built on fundamentally different beliefs about what people owe each other. The mother believes that family is a shared pool where you give when you have more. Mila believes that family doesn't get automatic access to what she's built. Neither of those ideas is rare, but they cannot coexist in the same space without conflict. And when that conflict finally surfaces, it doesn't end in compromise. It ends in distance. The real takeaway here isn't about who's right. It's about how quietly these fractures form. There's no single moment where things go wrong. Just years of small adjustments, unspoken expectations, and different interpretations of the same experiences. Until one day, someone says no. And everything that was tolerated suddenly becomes visible. That's what happened here. Not a sudden betrayal, just the first honest answer.